Our guest this week is Kimberley Tent, an author and retired Royal Canadian Mounted Police Constable. Kimberley lives in the beautiful Kootenay Mountains of southern British Columbia with her childhood sweetheart of 37 years. Kim has written books and articles in a variety of genres, but we're going to be talking about post-traumatic stress and three of her books, Parts of Me, Scattered Little Parts, and her latest book being released later this week, Sum of Parts. Kimberley has three amazing children and three grandchildren who have all been extremely supportive throughout her own journey with a post-traumatic stress injury. Her mission is to continue spreading awareness of post-traumatic stress through her own experience as a police officer and to provide hope and support to fellow first responders who are still suffering in silence. Kimberley Tent, welcome to Next Steps Forward.
Wow, what an introduction. Thank you, Chris. It's nice to be joining you this morning here.
Thanks for being here. And yes, we were just talking before the show how cold it is. Again, just tell our listeners how cold it is in the Kootenay Mountains.
Oh, we're in the minus 20s here today. And in totality, we have a few feet of snow, which is normal for this time of year up here.
So did you grow up in the Kootenay Mountains? And what was your childhood like?
No, I didn't grow up here. My mom's side of the family did, though. And when we were growing up, we spent a lot of time running around the Plateau in Kimberley and Cranbrook visiting relatives. And I have fond memories of running around the Plateau when I was probably 6 or 7 even. And I just knew that when I retired, I was going to retire here.
We're going to talk a lot about your career, first responders, and post-traumatic stress. But first, I want to focus on something different and a very important aspect of your life. You want to be not just a good mom, but the absolute best mom. And like many best moms, you ended up putting yourself last. We're always taught to sacrifice for others, but a lot of people just aren't wired to do that. For those of us who aren't moms, what does putting yourself last do to a mom physically, mentally, and emotionally?
First of all, truth. Best moms always seem to sacrifice for our kids. I just want to clarify something. When I say a best mom, I mean that not a perfect mom, but not your neighborhood mom, and not to be better than any moms around you, or me, I should say. But I just mean being the best mom that you can be in the circumstance you're in and the time of life that you're at. And yeah, that's a best mom. I just think that like when a mom's like we spend 20 plus years running around, giving to our families and our kids, to our husbands, but mainly towards the kids. And we start losing ourselves in the whole totality of it. Like, where am I in the whole chaos? Have you seen women's purses? They're not purses.
No,
We
they're
have
not.
suitcases, and we have suitcases for a reason. We have everything in there we need just in case. Our brains are wired that way, and women understand each other. Moms understand each other and why we do that. Just in case we need something. We spend days on end, dropping off our kid to hockey practice, the other one to piano lessons. We're letting the dog out. We're doing laundry, getting all the meals done. And you know what? I have to be at work at 9 as well. And, I have to phone hubby and make sure he remembers about, parents at his dinner place at 7 at their place. And we lose ourselves in the whole thing. And, the end result is, and I know I may joke about it, but there's some truth in it, is that men think moms like us, we're crazy. And maybe we are in some way, but we do the jobs of 10 people, and it's from giving.
I was laughing at your comment about the suitcase. I'm sorry, the purse size. When my wife and I travel, I think her purse is bigger than her carry-on suitcase, and so totally get that. Exactly, just in case.
Like, if you ask her anything that she has in there, she has it.
Oh, that I know. That I know. It's like there's no hole in there. Just magic things just keep coming out.
Exactly.
So was your decision to put yourself last a result of what your parents taught you about parenting, or was it a decision you made on your own?
I think it's actually a bit of both. I think as children, we all grow up And we retain both the positive and negative aspects of parenting from each one of our parents. My mother, my style was a lot like my mother parented for years and years and years. She was a giver. She sacrificed for us, and she still does, and she's 74. I think back, and she missed out on a whole lot of things that could have, made her life better or her well-being better. And she sacrificed that for us. And I think at a point, I came to that I grew into my own parenting style, my own mothering style. And I learned to say no, for example, and I'm not afraid to say no nowadays. And I learned that one on my own.
How should a mom measure her success as a parent? And does that measurement change as the kids get older?
Ooh. This may sound odd, but I don't think there is a measure. I don't think we can measure it. I guess I used to in a way, but I feel like it lends to feeling inferior, to other mothers, our friends, our family, other mothers. And I just feel like we lose out. And the other thing is, you may not agree with me, anyone may not agree with me, but I feel like measurement needs to have an end. Like, how do you measure something without an end? And mothering is ongoing for life. So, I just want my kids to be happy. And if they're happy, I'm happy. I don't know. I guess there's lots of time for measuring when I'm gone.
No, I totally agree with you. I think of, I'll call it success, for lack of a better word, is really just providing for your children and then just giving them the absolute best opportunities you can for them to succeed in life.
For sure.
Sounds fairly simple, but
yeah,
like you said, there's 20 years of work backfilling that to give them those opportunities.
Exactly.
And more than 20 actually nowadays. So how can or how should a mom make peace with the idea that she can't be super mom all the time and that it's okay?
First of all, every mother on this earth will relate to what I'm going to say, and that is, we would never make peace with the fact. We all want to be super moms, and we all want to be the best moms to our kids. So we all want to be super moms. It's the times when the 2 a.m. Moms out there will relate. The 2 a.m. Slide down the bedroom or the hallway wall, crying and drained totally because every child in the house is throwing up, and you don't have any bed linens left or towels, and hubby's out of town working, and you just throw your hands up in the air and you concede. You concede to the fact that, okay, I'm done. I can't do this by myself. But it's never peaceful. There's never a peaceful moment about that.
You spent 11 years of your life as a constable in the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. Did you always aspire to be a member of the RCMP, or did life take you that direction unexpectedly?
I knew from the time I was 6 years old that I was going to be a police officer. I didn't know for sure it was going to be with the RCMP, but I knew that I would be policing at some point in my life. Both my cousins in England were bobbies, and my dad also worked for the RCMP. So I guess it was inevitable. Maybe there was a bit of influence there.
It was in the blood.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
And how old were your kids when you joined the RCMP?
Oh gosh, they were all teenagers when I joined the RCMP. I was the oldest one in my troop at 38.
Two events in your career were particularly traumatic for you. One was a crash, and the other was an incident in which you were assaulted. Are you comfortable discussing them, even briefly, and their effects on you?
Yes, I am now. Yeah, that's coming full circle, is being able to talk about the events that shaped me into, who I am today. I just want to mention something, first of all. When I think about the incidents, both of them occurred in Williams Lake when I was posted there. And at that time, it was touted through not just the RCMP, but other police agencies in Canada to be one of the roughest and toughest places to police. There were gang shootings, machetes, violent assaults, extreme violence, and a hatred for police from many people that we faced. And it wasn't, an occasional occurrence. It was every shift. And so even before we went on to shift, we were heightened, and we knew what we were. You had to be ready. You had to be on guard. So I'll talk about an incident about when I was assaulted. I'll keep a long story short. I was attempting to effect a traffic stop with an old station wagon. And it was going all over the road, up on the curb and the sidewalk. And I couldn't even see into the back of it. It was just piled high of suitcases and household items. And so I couldn't even see who was driving. When I finally got the driver to stop, I could tell right away when I approached that the male was extremely agitated. And so right away, my police mind went straight to, okay, he's either really hopped up on narcotics or, he's having a mental health crisis. When he found out he had no insurance, he had no license to drive, anything like that. And when I had informed him that he wasn't able to drive the rest of the day, what I didn't know at the time was, I soon found out after, that he had nothing to lose. And he was schizophrenic and off his meds, and everything he ever owned was in that car. And so he felt at the time in his crisis that I was taking his whole life from him. And I can tell you it was a matter of seconds before he was out of that vehicle. And calling for help was pretty quick. In that incident, we were rolling around on that ground, punching, kicking, everything just to try and effect an arrest. And thank goodness my supervisor had come. And we ended up getting handcuffed. And down to the station he went. And I was so hopped up on adrenaline, I have to tell you, that I felt no injury whatsoever. But it wasn't until I think it was about half an hour into cells that my supervisor said, "Are you okay? Like, you're holding your mouth, weird." And he goes, "You better get to the dentist." I could feel grit in my teeth. And I ended up having my jaw broken in 3 places. So once here, down here, and on this side here. So I needed surgery, and I ended up, getting my mouth wired shut for 3 months. And the reason why I kind of wanted to bring up just that little bit of a background, it has some irony in it, because I still don't necessarily, I can relate to this fellow. I can relate to, I made peace with the fact that, he was off his medication. He had mental health crisis, so that incident, I've never had an issue with. I resolved that. I talked to him after. He ended up getting jail time. And when he was released, we talked, he apologized. It was fine. But what was not fine and what happened to me was actually after the surgery when I was wired shut. And that's the actual traumatic part for me. And I know it's hard to understand, if you're not me, but the nights of, it hitting me, I can't open my mouth. And, feeling like I was starving to death, feeling nauseous all the time, throwing up in my mouth, swallowing it back down, but not being able to get rid of it. It caused something clicked in my head, and anxiety went to like OCD. I had wire cutters. Like I recall laying on my back at night, having wire cutters, not just one pair, but several lined up beside my head, and just practicing to cut the wires because, what happened? I don't want to die. And just making sure, it got so bad, every night it would be, I would have trouble sleeping. And when I did sleep, it was only out of pure exhaustion. And just from that fear of not getting to those wires in time, and making sure that my husband was well trained, and him knowing that those cutters are there. So if I can't do it, you got to do it. And yeah, it weighed on me. Oh, it weighed on me. And the starvation part of it, the liquid diet, I was already, thin, and I just went into starvation mode. I never asked for help. I told everyone I was fine. Of course, especially workmates, peers, bosses. I'm all good, I'm top cop. I'm tough. I'm one of the boys. And what was really happening is I was dying inside, and I had so much trauma and so much negative energy, excuse me, and so much focus was on me possibly dying and me trying not to die, that I lost myself completely. I don't remember actually a lot of that time. I do remember the day I got my wires off, and the decision to take the wires off, happened a couple weeks early. And the reason for that is I actually was in starvation mode. And I recall talking to my GP about feeding methods and tubes and what was going to happen if I couldn't eat, if I didn't start eating. And so the decision was made to take the wires off. And I thought at that point, hunky-dory, all is good. And the first thing I thought about was eating a cheeseburger. Like, I needed to eat this cheeseburger and piece it all apart. And I did. I could only open my mouth maybe an inch still, because from being wired shut, the jaw was so stiff. And I forced that cheeseburger down. And what happened is I started, I had set in my mind, I'm starving. And I was diagnosed with refeeding syndrome. Within a couple of months, I was just throwing up everything. My body couldn't take what I wanted to, what my mind was telling it had to eat. So every time food hit my stomach, up it would come. And that turned into full-blown bulimia, for years, which was left untreated. The only person that had any inkling of, anything going on was my husband. And I, of course, remember the day that I made him promise, do not say a word to anyone. Yeah. And what a weight as a husband that must have carried. Like, I think back now and I was like, wow, that's so unfair. But, that's where I was in at the time. Mm-hmm.
Thank you for sharing that. I know it's not easy.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Things aren't easy, but it's necessary. It's necessary, to share events and stories so that other people who have gone through traumatic events can relate and say, hey, you know what? I'm not alone. Or that's weird. Like, how did that happen? Well, she doesn't really know how it happened, but she snapped, and look at her now. She's okay. So the other incident, all I'll really say about it, because it doesn't need to be a long drawn out story, is that it was a major crash on a very busy highway. And it just evolved into a multi-vehicle crash. And lots of other vehicles became involved. It was a complete nightmare. Today, to this day, I still have thoughts, not reoccurring, like intrusive thoughts, but I still think about it. And, I still sometimes at night can smell burnt flesh. I can still smell engine oil. But now, it's a lot different back then, when it woke me up and I'd be screaming in the night. It's a lot different now. It was just happening at that time and there was nothing I could do about it. And I felt like, as a supervisor, I was supervising at that time, that I totally lost control of that whole situation. And I couldn't save anyone. And so I think it was that stuck with me. But for years afterwards, I replayed nightly over and over and over that scene, and it got bigger and more enhanced. And my part in it became absolutely slow motion. And I even remember my thoughts. And it wasn't until years later, through therapy and EMDR, actually, to be specific, that I got the help I needed in dealing with that.
And EMDR is something you're hearing more and more about. I've had a few other guests on here talking about it. So congratulations to you for that. My listeners have learned and heard from me that, I was at ground zero 9/11 and have worked almost my entire career within blocks of ground zero. And it took me 17 years to go back. What are some of the symptoms of post-traumatic stress and what did you experience?
Oh my goodness, there are so many. Um, and many of us don't experience the same ones. They're all different and they're unique to us all. The nightmares, the sweats, recurring dreams, isolation, avoiding people, things, places. Oh goodness, the emotions, anger, crying for no reason or reasons that are not in a normal situation. Even shopping. Shopping gets out of control. Even out of control shopping is a behavior. And another one, self-harm. Fun fact, one thing I learned during therapy, and I know that sounded like very light and airy, but it's not. It's just, black humor, I guess. Being tattooed, getting inked, getting pierced during times of reflection and healing from traumatic experiences. The medical world views that as self-harm. And I did not realize that. I'm covered. I'm inked. And you'll notice that a lot of first responders, many first responders are. And it was very interesting to me to learn that, in the medical field, like that would be self-harm. And I think back, I got a whole lot of ink when I was going through what I was at the time. So who knows? It's just something I wanted to add in.
Oh, that's interesting because I always view the tattoos, whether it be military or first responders, police, fire, as just sort of their badge of honor. And that makes complete sense.
Yeah. Like for me, oh goodness, at first it was just like no sleep. And then the sweats and waking up, crying and, the smells. And, I was just so afraid that I was going to choke to death. And, I just remembered I would replay things over and over and over and over and over to every last detail. But there'd always be something added in. So it was almost like I was remembering another detail, or maybe it wasn't even a detail that even happened, that my mind was putting in there out of fear. That happened a few times. And oh man, just breaking out into full body sweats, isolating myself from my peers, from my family, only keeping in touch with my family as needed. And we lived 7.5, 8 hours from our closest child. So it was easy for me to pretend. But it got to the point, I stopped attending events, even with very close friends. And I was even afraid to leave the house. Actually, I don't want to say afraid. For some reason, I wasn't able to leave the house to walk across the street to the mailbox unless it was like 11 o'clock at night and nobody was around. Things like that. The avoidance of firearms, which I grew up out in the boonies. My dad was an outdoorsman. We were shooting from the time we were young. So, the avoidance of that. Driving carelessly, that was a huge thing for me. I remember being out on the open road in the summertime and not caring how fast I was going. And I would think, if I crashed, oh well. Just being totally reckless and, always having that feeling of not being good enough. Not ever having anyone be able to stand behind me. There's still times, even when my husband will come stand behind me on the couch, I'm uncomfortable, but I work through it now. But I tell you, I sure dealt with a lot of that. And then, those things go right into, I started having suicidal thoughts.
And Kim, apologies again to our listeners for that early break. Many of you heard my dog losing his mind at either the UPS guy or the squirrel that likes to taunt him. But as you were talking about what you were going through and how you were kind of reacclimating to the new world that you saw, I got the impression that your philosophy of putting others first and yourself last as a mom carried over to your time with the RCMP as you helped others cope with their own post-traumatic stress. Did you focus on others or help your own mental health issues?
Oh, absolutely focused on others. I wanted to be the best supervisor out there. I think, looking back, it provided me a vessel to focus on outside of myself. And I'm pretty darn sure it didn't help end up helping me in the end, but it felt good at the time.
And as a constable, you tackled most problems head on, but you avoided dealing with your PTS. Why did you avoid that?
Oh, goodness. Well, it would make me not perfect, for one. I was a perfectionist. I try not to be these days. But it took me a long time to become a Mountie, to be the police officer that I worked so hard to be. And by dealing with my PTS would mean that I would have to be open to others knowing what I was dealing with. And then I wouldn't be one of the boys. I'd have to give up that, rough and tough, aspect of policing in my mind that have made me inferior.
In your experience dealing with others, is avoidance a common response to post-traumatic stress?
Absolutely. I could teach avoidance 101 for sure. I'm pretty sure I could teach that university class. The stigma to it is real. No one wants to feel that they're less than or they're not capable, especially out on the job.
Let's talk about your books. The first book, Parts of Me.
Mm-hmm.
That didn't start as a book, did it?
Sorry, what was that?
The first book, Parts of Me, did not start out as a book, correct?
Oh gosh, nowhere near. I wrote pieces every day. I wrote daily. I journaled as a part of my own healing through what I was going through at the time, through that darkness. It wasn't until years later that a peer at work asked me, how did you know when you had PTS? Like what did you feel and what were your symptoms? And I was like, oh, I can tell exactly how I was feeling. And I gave her, a couple of things that I'd written. She's like, oh my gosh. And I said, it's better to be read than it is, for me to tell you. And that's how it all started. I thought, you know what? I've had like all these different, stages. I like to think of them as stages of healing. And yeah, it was blatantly, you could see each one. So I thought, why not put it in to help other first responders?
And did that writing help you move from stage to stage, or was it simply a record of your ups and downs?
I don't think it helped me move from stage to stage. I think that journaling itself helped me get through each day and each stage. And I didn't know there were stages at the time. It's just looking back now, I'm like, oh, there were clear stages. And yeah, I think at the time it was that in combination of different therapies, were what helped me move on from stage to stage.
And we've had a lot of guests on the show who've gone through post-traumatic stress and mental health challenges, and many of them have talked about journaling, like you were doing here. Do you recommend journaling for everyone?
I'm a writer, of course. I recommend journaling from everybody on this earth. Like I had my first journal when I was 7, and I never looked back. Definitely recommend. It's freeing. It's well, you and I both know we have things that we do not tell anyone, even our closest, like our spouses, like our closest friends. Only we know about our truth. And I'm all about the truth. And so if you can get your truth on paper without thinking that anyone is going to read it. You do what you want with it after, burn it, throw it in the trash or whatever, but it's out there and it gets it outside of yourself. And I just feel like it's good for the soul. Journaling is fabulous.
And I finally took people's advice from telling me to journal. I mentioned before about my post-traumatic stress at ground zero. And earlier this year, I published my first book, and the first chapter is pretty much the minute-by-minute accounting of my 9/11 day. And just living through all that. And to your point, putting it down, I did it just to write it. Didn't think there'd be a hardcover on it.
Right.
So I also recommend it to everybody out there just for your own personal well-being.
Getting it all out.
Your second book is quite different than your first. The difference being a shift from poetic to a more traditional narrative. Why the difference?
Well, I like to think that like books 2 and 3 are equally poetic. I just believe that they're different stages. They were at different stages. I think there's a definite difference between each piece that I wrote, but I think it all depended on how I was feeling in that moment and where I was at when I wrote them. So not necessarily. I like to think they're all poetic, but I also think that, looking back now on each of those books, that there was a difference in self-confidence, and that grew. That was huge. That grew from book to book.
And you wrote that you had unrealistic self-expectations when you were a constable. What were those expectations, and why were they so unrealistic?
Well, first of all, I had to be perfect. I've said that a few times now. I wanted nothing less, and I demanded nothing less of myself out there. But I also didn't want that for myself. My expectations were that my watchmates, my detachment, my bosses, my supervisors, even my husband, who is also a member of the RCMP, and he worked on a unit, and it wasn't even in our jurisdiction. But when I helped their unit out, my expectations were, I had to do the very best job that anyone has ever done on this file. Looking back, you need backup. I'm the first one there. You need breakfast after our last night shift. I'll make the best breakfast. You couldn't go to a sudden death. I'll go. I've seen everything. So it got to that point where, I had time for everything. I had time to start new committees. I had, this one time I had 3 broken toes on my right foot. And nobody knew except my GP and my husband. And I worked like that. I had them all taped up and in my boot. And I worked like that. Nobody knew a thing, because if somebody knew, then I'd have to be off work. And to me, that wasn't going to happen. Nobody demanded that of me. My bosses didn't demand me to be perfect. I'm sure that they just wanted me to be, and do my best that I could that shift. But I demanded that of myself, and I had something to prove in the end. And it wasn't to anybody else, but it was to myself.
I guess finally, talking about expectations, how do your expectations of the RCMP as an institution match up with your reality?
Well, first of all, I want to be clear about something. So before and after I was institutionalized, for PTS and eating disorder, I was very angry at the RCMP as a whole. I felt let down. I felt betrayed. Forgotten about. I felt everything was their fault at the time, and I don't want to say hatred, because it's but I despised the RCMP for letting me fall through the cracks and forgetting about me. And, it took me years of processing healing to realize that they played a huge part in my PTS symptoms worsening by not calling me and not helping me for 11 weeks. But they didn't cause my PTS. And, they didn't help me out in the time frame I needed. But at the time, thinking back, I feel like I felt they owed me something. They owed it to me, and I wasn't putting in the work myself. And I think that was a huge hindrance. How could it not be? I gave them everything. When I say that, I mean it. I loved my job and the RCMP more than I loved myself. And that's a huge statement. And I say it all the time. It's true. I gave too much of myself away. I breathed it. I ate it. I slept it. I became my job. It was my identity. And I don't have blame for any there's no blame in my PTS, and I don't have time for that anymore.
We hear so often when people are in crisis that they have to hit rock bottom before they seek help. Now, I don't believe that's always the case. What was your turning point in your struggle with post-traumatic stress?
Oh, goodness. Well, you're going to find out that one in book 3, because I write a lot about it in book 3. I talk about the moment I met a homeless man and visited with a homeless man back east when I was in treatment there. And I learned his entire life story and, through it all. And he was homeless, and just his outlook on life, it inspired me and caused me to look at only truth. And those were his words. What's your truth? What's the truth? And I find myself, it changed everything for me. I find myself saying that a lot to people.
First responders aren't the only people who struggle with anxiety or stress or other mental wellness challenges. And your books aren't just for first responders, are they?
No, gosh, no, not at all. Well, first of all, post-traumatic stress doesn't discriminate. It affects anyone and everyone who has been, not everyone, but anyone who has been through a post-traumatic, traumatic incident at all. It can affect anyone. I want to bring something up. And that is definitely my part series is not just for first responders. It's from anyone struggling from the effects of PTSD, as well as family members, trying to figure out, what is my spouse, partner, husband, father, mother thinking, and how can I help? It becomes clear. But I think, as far as first responders, I think just because a lot of the pieces are written from experiences on the job, that they may be able to relate to that more.
You've written that a life as a police officer can be lonely. I think a lot of people think of the police as sticking together and being very close-knit society. Why is life as a police officer so lonely?
Oh, wow, you hit the nail on the head with that one. Because police officers, we do stick together. And I don't have to know you. I don't have to have ever met you. But if you have been a police officer or are a police officer, I call you my brother. I call you my sister. And that's just because we can relate to each other and we relate to the job. I feel that, the loneliness part, especially for me, came with still, even in that brotherhood or sisterhood, still putting on that facade that everything is good, everything is okay. Even during briefings, we debrief after, I'd make sure as a supervisor we debriefed. And not once do I ever remember, saying exactly how I was feeling. I could be trembling inside, but oh no, yeah, that's good, And I don't ever remember showing weakness in any way. We don't want to be kicked out of the brotherhood. We want to go to the barbecue on Saturday, right? And sometimes that doesn't happen anymore if he's having problems or she's having problems. And I didn't want that to happen to me.
I know it's always dangerous to generalize, but younger officers would seem to be stronger and more physically able to handle an assault than an officer in his or her 40s or 50s. At the same time, the younger officers haven't seen as many situations and know how to process them as well. Does post-traumatic stress from an incident such as an assault affect others differently based on their age?
Yes, it's dangerous to generalize, but I will comment. And I think on that, from my own experience, no, I don't think that age differentiates your training. As long as you stay healthy and fit in the course of your duties and over the years, age has nothing to do with it. In fact, I think that age and experience in policing, especially, creates smarts and experience that reactions and debriefing are, they become paramount. The older we get and the more experience we have, there's more of a plus that way. But I mean, as far as, age, nah, I don't think so.
Age is just a number, right?
Sure.
Problem is mine keeps getting bigger and bigger. The Institutes of Health report that 4 out of 5 first responders experience traumatic events on the job. So obviously it's no surprise that puts first responders at high risk of developing post-traumatic stress as a work-related injury or condition. And there's my dog again. Why is it that 50% apparently do not experience PTS while 30% do? Or are the numbers just wrong?
Oh man, first of all, I'm not an expert in statistics, and I don't dabble in them. And there's reasons why, but I can tell you that I do believe that the number of police officers who are recorded to have a suffering from PTS is much higher than the recordings, and I call it because of the "I'm fine" stigma. Two officers can go to a major police incident and one walks away smiling, right? And the other one, his partner or her partner, suffers. And then, for days, weeks, they're yelling at their kids, they're drinking too much, but every shift, he or she goes into work and their partner is fine. Life is good. Oh yeah, it's not bugging me. So there's that pressure and that instinct that we tell ourselves, well, we should be okay too. And, unfortunately in some circumstances, a couple months later, they put their gun to their head and we're left asking why. And it just goes to show that no two people respond the same way to a traumatic incident. And, that's just what I've experienced. And it happens daily.
Before you were talking about one of your incidents with the man who was schizophrenic, I saw a news story last night on a couple of police officers in Texas where they pulled somebody over and the passenger would not put his hands up on the dashboard. And then all of a sudden you could see from the body cam him reaching and pulling his gun out. And the officer was forced to shoot him dead on the spot.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't think about it or realize, but to say that, approaching a car is the most common thing a police officer does and also the most dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
And so now I think about that officer just took someone's life. Yes, that's his job. But then how do you process that, knowing or just maybe assuming that the person in the car could be a husband, a father, a brother, etc. And I just couldn't fathom that. But at the very least, I just want to thank you and your brothers and sisters for your service and your sacrifice. I just want to put that out there.
Oh, thank you. And I'm sure everybody, every responder right now thanks you as well.
So in addition to your books, how do you help others experience post-traumatic stress and how can people get in touch with you?
Oh, goodness. Well, first of all, there's many ways that I help first responders and veterans, by the way, I have to add. I help fund programs, PTSD programs, donations. Also, an important aspect of what I do is to advocate. I'm an advocate for first responders and PTSD, PTSI, as we like to say now, and getting them into programs, even if they're agencies. It doesn't matter what agency, fire, police, ambulance, dispatchers, whoever. These agencies, if they don't recognize the program that is best suited, for the person, and they cannot afford the cost to go, that's where I come in. That's where this series comes in, and the proceeds from it go, even to groceries. Sometimes, we have veterans that can't feed themselves, or certain incidences, I will reach out, and when I feel led, I'll add and get them there. I even at one point had donated we had a veteran back east who needed a service dog badly, and there was a 3-year wait. And I know because I waited 3.5 years for Lily, and I donated a service dog to that veteran, and it was rewarding, very, very rewarding. And people can reach me, just so everyone knows, people can reach me at kimtent3@hotmail.com. And you can also reach me through my Part Series website, and it's www.apothicentertainmentbooks.com. And then, of course, on the social media, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn. I'm easy to find, and reach out to me there if you want to chat, or you want to talk about some struggles with, your first responder in your family or yourself. And yeah.
So I want to go back to something you mentioned a moment ago, PTSI. So several years ago, I was in an event that had a Medal of Honor recipient talking about PTSD. And he said, but you have to drop the D, it's not a disorder. And so I've been very careful ever since then, and referring to it as post-traumatic stress. What's the I and why the I?
So PTSI is more of an injury. So the I is for injury instead of a disorder. I think that, especially coming from a first responder who doesn't like to be labeled, that label of having a disorder was just, something that we brought on ourselves. Whereas PTSI, and talking about an injury, is something that actually happened to us, and it was not something that we brought on ourselves. It was, it was not preventable at that time for us.
Thank you for clarifying that. And I'm going to, from now on, refer to as PTSI. That's a huge, huge shift in the mindset, because we know, at least those who engage with first responders, there's a stigma associated with having something, air quote, wrong, being a police officer, a firefighter, et cetera. You're going to lose your gun, your promotion, your security clearance, your benefits. And that just eats away inside day after day, year after year. And so having people talk about it like yourself out there gives so many others like you hope and opportunity. And so just thank you for being so raw and honest with us today.
Absolutely. I can't imagine. I can't imagine, because there was a point in time where I wasn't able, and not at the point where I was able to talk about what had happened to me. And believe me, my story doesn't end there. It didn't, it may have started at that point, but there's so much that happened in between, and it was compounded for me. And for some people, it can be a one incident, but in policing and law enforcement, complex PTSD is definitely prevalent.
So we have just a few minutes left. Take us to the close with your advice on how to look after and protect our own well-being and become more empowered.
Oh my goodness. Okay. So first of all, I've got so much to say in 3 minutes. Okay. So first of all, just remember that no one is perfect, and you are not perfect, and I'm not perfect. So we need to give ourselves some grace. So please give yourself some grace. And also write a list. This is important. And this is coming from the writer, I know, but write yourself a list of things that you will commit to, fulfilling daily. Provoking things that provoke good thoughts, make you feel good, calm your anxieties, and it'll be different for everyone. I love my list. I personally love my list. And at first it's a commitment, but if you keep doing it day after day after day, I don't necessarily look at my list anymore. I know it's on there. And at the end of the day, hey, you know what? I never phoned a friend today. So I'll reach out and call a friend and listen to how their day was. Yeah. And that's something else, by the way, that everybody can read at the end of book 3, which ironically releases this week. So I'm excited about that as well. And I have my list right here. Do we have just a little bit of time?
About 90 seconds.
Okay. So I call it my essential daily 10. Wake up grateful and thankful, and say so. Speak it out loud. Speak up and claim what is meant to be mine in this world. Rise and shine. Appreciate cuddles with my fur babies. Prayers and stretch, and always meditation and medication. So it's just a good way for me to stay, like, make sure that I'm taking my medication. Always enjoy a mug of tea and read to learn. Get outside. I always get outside for 30 minutes and have fun. Go for walks, do fun things with friends. Also cooking, use a skill. It doesn't have to be cooking, but any skill. Connect with a family member or friend. Write a letter or mail to someone across the miles. And then finally, work hard with heart and write hard with passion. And I do everything with passion in both. Mm-hmm.
Kimberley Tent, thank you so much for being with us today.
Oh, thanks for having me. We'll have to spend some time.
Absolutely. I want to apologize for my dog Zeke. We're a few days before Christmas, and Santa's elves from Amazon and UPS came here a couple of times. So apologies for interrupting your story.
No problem at all.
I'm Chris Meek. We're out of time. We'll see you next week. Same time, same place. Until then, stay safe and keep taking your next steps forward.